Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. Slight update of the EVE Talk settings for me personally, a little bit of a test as well to see if YouTube will be able to process this one a little bit more quickly. And as always, we'll start with a little bit of news. There's not that much, but CCP did give us the information that an update is coming for the Abyss with a tier 0 and a tier 6 type of abyssal pockets. We will also now be able to go into the Abyss with 2 destroyers. So it's 1 cruiser, 2 destroyers or 3 frigates. Very interesting, of course, and does open up quite a few more possibilities. And so far we've also seen that Tech 3 destroyers could actually take part. That could definitely become the new meta. My personal hope a little bit is that we will also start to see Vorton projector skill books and things like that drop from the Abyss. I think that there's a small chance for that. Lore-wise, it's not that easy to explain, but of course Edencom and the Triglavians have now been at war for quite a little bit of time, and the Triglavians are all about adaptation, and that does mean, I think, that getting to know your enemy is a big part there, and so perhaps they will also be looking at, capturing or pilots, maybe their implants, and trying to like reverse engineer the Vorton skill books and things like that. It could be very interesting. I was very surprised on CC to see that we actually have Edencom ships in there, so that was kind of cool. We do have to destroy them then. I don't think it will have an impact on your reputations, but very unexpected change here that Edencom does not stay on the defensive but is actually starting to venture into the Abyss as well. And another thing that was actually just announced basically is that next week will be GM week. Kind of interesting. There's definitely lots of events that you can take part in. There's potentially some cool rewards there as well, and if I'm not mistaken, on Monday there's a very good chance that we'll be able to pad our kill boards a little bit, going after bots, and that should be in the system of July. If you can, it's definitely worth a visit, because that's when CCP finds bots in nullsec, teleports them to July for us to butcher. So that's going to be pretty interesting. We'll see if that does happen, but the last couple of times were actually quite fun and very rewarding, I think, for everyone participating, feeling like you're doing your part in fighting bots. Next up, let's take a quick look at the new Eden store and see if there's anything happening over here. We do have a sale happening on Kikimora Esketen skins for Kaldari ships. A couple of bundles front and center. So that sale even for the Leviathan. It's a pretty cool skin, I think. I like those muted colors, a little bit of gray, black, whitish, nothing too overt. And then we still see a new skins, or the Blue Star Defender skins showing up as new. So, a little bit too flashy for my personal taste, but they are of course skins for those Edencom ships if you want them. Nothing too major on the sales though. There's just that one skin line for sale. Alright, that means that we can move on to the market here. As always, we're going to start with some plex and stuff, and that's going to be at 340. Like that, and let's get started here. Rather interesting, not completely what I expected, but plex have actually gone down in price in Jita. 2.7 million for the sellers and just below 2.6 million for the buyers. And then if we go for the player-owned trade hubs, very narrow margin between Jita itself, the first seller, and the cheapest seller in the Tranquility Trading Tower. Still above 2.7 million. Are the buyers a bit more aggressive? No, they're also staying just below 2.6 million. So it's not bottom prices, but we clearly have a little bit of a stall here in the increased price. On the other hand, you can clearly notice that during a 3-day period here, there was that sale on Omega Time, which has increased demand for plex very substantially all of a sudden, caused a spike in the price to go to almost 2.8 million, and that apparently is a little bit too much too fast for the market, and that this is why I would say we have this pause. How long will it last? I don't know, but I personally don't think we'll see 2.5 million, a retreading of the previous bottom from this point on. I may be wrong on that, I always have to admit it, but summertime is over. I think activity will start to increase as well. as people go back to school, get back to their normal routines, if they can, of course. But you know, less sunshine, especially here in Europe and things like that, does usually mean that people start to stay at home a little bit more, and that usually increases activity. For the multiple pilot train certificate, we have basically the same thing. We've got this spike that overshot a little bit, trying to get to 1.4 billion, and then we have a little bit of a pullback as we absorb basically that plex sale. And at the tail end here, you can see that we're already flattening out. So again, we were well below 1.3 billion at the bottom prices, and right now we are selling for almost 1.4 billion in the Tranquility Trading Tower, quite a bit above that in JITA 4.4, and the buyers are still below 1.3 billion, so you can get some good deals going if you can grab a multiple pilot train certificate from the buy orders. But the average prices clearly show that that's very difficult to do at the moment. You have to come up with quite a bit of an extra margin on these buyers if you want to be certain of actually grabbing one. Next up, we have the skill extractors, and here we can of course expect that super strong correlation with plex prices themselves. Despite the fact that we don't see that same volume spike in the skill extractors, we do have that price response on something happening to plex. So we went up to 330 million ISK, a little bit of a landing, but still well clear of the bottom that was substantially below 300 million. We're at 306 million for the sellers and 299 for the buyers, so that's pretty much 300 million there as well. Very, very narrow margins in these skill extractors. Clearly some hesitation still in the market, and that's what we'll have to see the upcoming weeks, of course. Will people come back, increase demand, and just put some extra pressure on the price to go up, or is there like botting efforts and things like that that could still, basically how I'm seeing this, increase the value of ISK, so decrease the price of a lot of these goods. On the skill injector front, we've got large skill injectors that have actually been able to maintain a small increase in price over the last week as well, despite the fact that we just broke through 700 million ISK. We're pulling up from that a little bit. 708 million for the sellers, 678 for the buyers, and in JITA we are selling for 730 million ISK. Very same story here. Definitely a substantial margin still between sellers and buyers, especially if you look at JITA itself, but the average prices show that it's difficult for people to grab from the buy orders. Most trading is happening in the sell orders at the moment, which in my opinion shows that there is decently strong demand, and that the sellers have the luxury of knowing that, you know what, I'm just gonna put it on the market and wait for someone to buy it, because that demand is there. That's where the average prices are landing. For these small scale injectors, we have a bit more hesitation here, so basically a sideways movement in the last 10 days or so, the first week of September, but we're definitely pulling away from that bottom price, and there's no real sign that we're getting back towards that one. 143 million for the sellers, 134 for the buyers, still also a reasonable margin between sellers and buyers, and the average price again well above 140. So for 134 for these buyers, very, very tricky to actually make that happen. We also have the daily alpha injectors, which have been decreasing in price, while the other injectors have been increasing in price in the last month or so. What I'm seeing here is a bit more hesitation, and to my surprise, I would also almost call this a bit more volatility. You actually have definitely the daily alpha averages and the 5-day moving average actually moving up and down, bobbing up and down a little bit, so there's no uniform move to be spotted here. Definitely feels like a little bit of hesitation. We're talking 38 million for the sellers and 34 million for the buyers, and so the way I'm going to be reading this is that there's definitely here days where the buyers are dominating the price. Like right here, I would call that 7 or 8 days ago, we're at 35 million average, with 38 million or even more back then for the sellers and these types of buyers. There must have been quite a few buy orders filled in order to make that daily average happening. And so here I'm reading this as there's quite a bit of hesitation. Should we continue to go down in price? And some people apparently believe that, yeah, dumping to the buyers is a good idea, or Are we going to go up in price? And on some days you can clearly see that the averages are trying to pull back up here. So a bit more volatility, a bit more hesitation in the daily alpha injectors. I think under pressure from seeing what happens to these other skill injectors, and basically is it that logical that the alpha injectors keep going down while the others have actually been increasing their price? I think the market may be hesitating on that a little bit. And finally, we've got the hypercores that have basically done a little bit of a bubble late August and the start of September. Volume-wise, there's not much to say, but we are stabilizing a bit above these bottom prices again here as well. 283,000 pretty much for the sellers, 290 almost for the sellers in Jita, and then 270,000 for the buyers. Well, it is the Hypernet Relay. It's really a bit of a niche item, but it could also be an indication of, for the longer term, in my opinion, stronger activity or not in the game. And so here we're also starting to see, here in September, sure, we've pulled back in price, but we're nowhere near these bottom prices. Well, actually, we're pretty near these bottom prices, but at least we're above these bottom prices of July and August, the summer months. And you can here, I do feel like you've got the seasonal trend showing up here, right? Winter, lots of activity, lots of people indoors. Well, at least that's winter for like the northern hemisphere here, for Europe, US, things like that. And thus you have actually decently strong prices at around 350,000 ISK, and then as the summer comes in, activity declines, prices go back down, and now here September is coming in and we get a little bit of volatility, a couple of moves up here. Let's see if that trend will continue. That is my personal expectation, although I've said this many times before as well. CCP is a deciding factor in here. Can they build up hype? Can they make some cool announcements that will bring people back into the game? Or can the war do that, of course? Could we see a more prolonged contest, perhaps like a big super capital engagement that will make the news? It's been a long time since Nullsec has actually been able to pull off a fight that's been so large that it's really been at the forefront of like the gaming community in general. Something like that happens, that generally also does build up hype and starts a boom in a lot of these prizes. Next up, we have the minerals coming in at 1220. Let's go quick check. Yeah, we're looking okay on the recording there. So as always, we'll start with the titanium, and you can see that we are stalling with our increased price and staying below 8 ISK. But again, let's keep this in mind. This is actually, even historically speaking, a very, very good price for titanium. So here we do generally have to go back to Jita Station for the right prices. 803, 804 for most sellers. One of them is coming in at 788. I personally do think that this will be grabbed up very quickly. Buyers at 754, showing strong demand, but not really a willingness to that easily go above 8 ISK either. So these guys are staying well below 8 ISK. It's the sellers that are trying to do that, though. What's very noticeable here is that 788, 803, 804, 805, 810, 825, 830. So you can see that they're jumping up quite a few cents in the sell orders. You would usually expect more volumes and more competition, point oneing each other quite a bit more often. So this really is showing that I think supply-wise we are struggling to meet demand at the moment, and so we're able to ask this nice almost 8 ISK for titanium on average. Next up here we have the pyrite chart, which we saw last week. It finally stemmed the bleeding, went up to 8 ISK, nice, almost double the price from the start of the year, but over the summer months actually having to give back quite a bit of ground. Part of my theory is that there's still big stocks out there. Isogen, pyrite, definitely the biggest casualties of the resource bonanza of the last couple of years, where they were just too plentiful for the needs. Titanium, Mexalon, always a little bit less plentiful and actually far more reasonable in prices. But to give you that perspective again, pyrite used to be more expensive than titanium, and now, well, it's around the same price on average, and most of the time actually below the price of titanium. So it's really been struggling, and I do think that there were or are big stocks of that out there still. On the other hand, last week or last 10 days or so, we are finally increasing back in price. So everything below 6 ISK did seem to be investment worthy by the market, and we are recovering a little bit. 616, and we're going up to 650 decently quickly in the sellers. That's not that much pyrite to get there. And then we've got 606 for the buyers, basically feeling forced to go above 6 ISK to constantly be able to grab that pyrite. That's kind of interesting. And then the bad news, if you're looking for higher price, of course, is that, well, we still have this right here, right? 637, you've got another 7-8 billion units of pyrites in the weight that have been put up like 3 days ago. I think this is exemplary of those stocks that do still exist out there for some of these minerals. Compare that to titanium. We've got one seller here of 92 million units, but everything else is definitely a lot lower in volume than this big chunk of pyrite that is basically keeping the price from going up and staying up in JITA at least. So that's a substantial amount of pyrite that is putting some inertia on the price, and I think definitely showing that example of what I'm saying. There are still players with very massive stocks of some of these minerals. Next up, we have Mexalon that is continuing to slowly give a little bit of room, but staying super high at a very good price here. We are talking 88 ISK for the sellers and 84 ISK for the first buyer, going down to 83.75 for quite a few of them. But yeah, this is a very expensive price for Mexalon. 70 is actually still a great price. So this is very nice, and it's obvious that your focus, like in the last couple of months, if you are mining, focus on Mexalon, focus on titanium, try to add a little bit of Noxium in the mix, and that's really where you're getting the most efficiency out of your time spent at the moment. And hopefully, if enough players do that, which they naturally should, we will finally be able to also get through those stocks of pyrite, through those stocks of isogen, and then find that right price range, that right value for the mining efforts that people put into the game. Next up here we get isogen basically flattening out, so it still is been able to hold on to its gains a lot better than what pyrite has done. You can see that massive decline back, having to give back probably 2/3 of the price gains at the resource crunch. Here for isogen, it's a lot more muted, but it's pretty obvious that here we're also struggling to become very valuable, like Mexalon is very valuable at the moment. Again, that same perspective. Isogen, which at the moment is costing like 25 ISK, used to be more expensive than Mexalon because you're mining a lot less of that per cubic meter normally, but just, you know, there's going to be stocks out there, the needs are too low, and that is why it is at the moment like 1/3 of the price of Mexalon. 24 ISK for the sellers, 22 ISK for the buyers, and another example, in my opinion, showing that a big part of the equation, of course, there's gonna be like moon mining and other things as well, supply side things as well, but 2 billion units at 2407. Compare that to the volumes of Mexalon that's struggling to get above 10 million. You gotta get to 90 ISK to get 33 million units here. These are all, that's my only logical explanation here, is that these are all the investments of people that are still trying to dump them at a profit, which is not that easy to do. I mean, you've got that first initial spike, but I also think that there's possibly older stocks out there that have been far more expensive, and then people, you know, they've seen that 30 has been possible on the first reaction to the resource crunch, so why not hope for that price again? And so there is this inertia, in my opinion, in all stocks of isogen and of pyrite that are, well, for miners it's unfortunate, for industrialists it's very fortunate, that are basically dragging out an increased value of all the minerals. This does mean that there's still cheap stuff basically out there. Very nice to actually see these huge sell orders here all of a sudden. To put that into context, I do think that these show that at least for a big part, yeah, all stocks are still at play for Isogen and for Pyrite, and that is the reason why they just are not increasing in price like Mexlon has, and like Tritanium has, and like Noxium is still doing. This is getting almost ridiculous. You do have to start to be careful, and if you have investments, I would definitely sell them right now, because this is a 1, 2, 3, 4th step up to 700 ISK for Noxium. Very defined 1-year high point. We start at 250, so this is almost triple the price all of a sudden on this 1-year chart, and definitely I would call this a late bloomer in the minerals. 700 ISK for the sellers, 665 for the buyers, and this is the real question, of course. What is happening in Noxium? Is this all of a sudden massive amounts of demands? Has anything changed in the needs of the EVE Online economy? No. Let's compare that to like the Mexlon chart. Look at where that one started to increase late last year. Let's take a quick look at Tritanium. Late last year, you also have this increase, and Tritanium actually always doing a little bit better because it is the most bulky mineral, but Noxium right here in July, summertime, this is where we have this massive increase. We have had the resource jump, had to give back a little bit away, but now here this climb to me indicates that this is potentially what could happen when those stocks do eventually deplete, when supply demand of current activity actually collides and has to find a way, and that is up in price. That is obviously up in price because you know, it's not that easy to get a lot of Noxium to the market these days, and so this is also a little bit dangerous. We don't see this very often where a good actually goes up 1, 2, 3, 4 to like 4 year high points, and every single time jumping quite significantly above 400, above 500, above 600. Now we're playing with 700 ISK. That cannot continue indefinitely either, of course, but not to try and you know, incentivize people to all of a sudden massively start buying Isogen and Pyrite, but I would still have patience for that, because if this is indeed the trigger point here in July, where you get a little bit more volume, potentially the war and things like that as well playing a role, and that we have pushed through these reserves, these old stocks of Noxium, and this is the price response, of course, who knows what could then happen to Isogen and Pyrite when these sell orders of billions of units also finally dry up there. It could be that what's happening with Noxium is in the books in a more prolonged resource crunch for the other minerals as well. Very, very cool to see, in my personal opinion. After that, we have Zydrine. That has also, you know, a bit of a late bloomer, but this is because the massive impact for Zydrine and Megasite has actually not been the crunch announced like late last year, but the changes to moon mining, where you had very stable, very plentiful supplies of Zydrine and Megasite coming from HiSec all of a sudden, and that meant that that had completely changed the dynamic of the market as well, with just constant streams of a couple million units coming to the market. Very, very competitive, and we crashed the price down to 500 ISK. But look at that, on this change with more exclusivity again, of course, Zydrine, not that easy. You're not gonna grab it from every type of space. We're back up to 1000 ISK, which historically speaking is, I think, a normal price range for Zydrine, and over the summer, with a couple of spikes even, we have been able to very, very easily defend that 1000 ISK range. 1075 for the sellers, 1000 for the buyers, and that change in the dynamic is pretty obvious if we look at this as well. These average prices that used to be right in the middle of sellers and buyers, and with actually very narrow margins, because you just had these small parties. Everyone could basically have a refinery up on the moon and could bring whatever they produced every week, every 2 weeks, whatever it was that their cycles were on, and so you had lots and lots of competition from all spaces to sell those minerals. Now it's far more exclusive. You gotta bring this into JITA from somewhere, and that means that these sellers are now dictating the price. The average price is very clearly a lot closer to these sellers than to these buyers, and so again they're forced above 1000 ISK because there's just no option. Most players that have Zydrine for sale know that, you know, the buyers are going to buckle anyways and are going to move to these sell orders. So that is a complete 180, a complete change in the dynamic of the sideline market that we have witnessed due to the changes to moon mining. And there is then this one exception, this that is still a bit of a mystery, and we're again pulling down in Megasite, going well below 500 disc. The one mineral that I thought would revalue a lot more, because Megasite actually used to be more expensive than Zydrine, and it does not. 477 for the sellers of Megasite, 412 for the buyers. Compare that to the start of the year at 400 disc. We barely made any gains in the price of Megasite, and I personally think when it comes to Megasite that it is not stocks. That doesn't make that much sense to me. The hardest to get Tech 1 mineral, you could say, should not be that plentiful that you can make such a big stock that you're now keeping the price in check. This must be a supply-demand situation where perhaps industrial needs are not exactly what they used to be, perhaps with all the new structures, the new ships and things like that, that Megasite has taken a little bit of a backseat to Zydrine, and that there's still supplies out there for Megasite being created, presumably, in my opinion, by the invasion content that is keeping this price, well, very much in check. Too, of course, the sadness, you could say, or you know, the miners would wish to see it otherwise, but the industrialists probably feel pretty good about a mineral that actually decreases in price. So everything has two sides, of course. And then finally, we've got Morphite that is back in a more normal range, bobbing above the 10,000 ISK at the moment. 12,000 for the sellers and 9,000 for the buyers. 9,116 for the buyers. That is interesting. Very difficult to grab it, but you can also see that there are days where we do test that 10,000 ISK average price, and you know, Morphite for less than 10,000 ISK, I always see that as a worthy investment. So I'm kind of surprised by this basically massive decline in demand in buy orders, and this big margin that has opened up, where basically a bottom has fallen out of the Morphite market, with a super strong summer and spring here, going up to 15,000 and 20,000 ISK even, but right now at the tail end, this is the first time I think since like February or so, or even before that we have seen buyers below 10,000 ISK. This could already be a buy opportunity. Alright, let's move on to PI, coming in at 26.55. Okay, that was actually, you know, pretty long, but we'll see. A good long EVE talk could be good for the YouTube test as well. But I will try to make a little bit of speed. So let's take a look at the broadcast node, selling for 1.9 million, buyers coming in at 1.8 million. A little bit of a pullback, although the daily prices over the last week have been at the lower end here. So a little bit of a spike that is now being absorbed by the market, and that, in my opinion, is of course the announcement of the new core for the structures. That should mean more destruction, and then as a result the market did speculate a little bit on more demand as well, but perhaps another way of thinking is starting to dominate at this point, is that perhaps this will also just leave a lot of the smaller players out of the structure market, and that for the really big players it could mean that they will put an end to spam, which could then of course mean less structure construction in general as well. And so you do have these two lines of thinking. On the one hand, it'll be easier to destroy, there's more motivation to destroy structures. On the other hand, that also means that there's less motivation to just risk them, to put them up. And so it's these two forces that are now probably trying to find their way into what should we do when it comes to advanced PI materials. Bit of a jumpy start here, lots of people wanting to be ready for potentially higher demand, but some uncertainty as we see this pullback in the 5-day moving average. Construction blocks are continuing to try and get back above 10,000 ISK. I think sellers will be there, yeah, almost 11,000 for the sellers, 9,300 for the buyers. On this 1-year chart it looks pretty good, but let's keep in mind that this is actually a rather depressed price from where we normally, or like over a year ago, saw construction blocks. So this could become the new normal, of course, and then we are actually at the average price. But if demand picks up up after summertime, I would not be surprised that this bottom price of 8K will turn out to be very good investments and that we could get back to a higher average price for a lot of these goods. Consumer electronics is basically in the same boat here. I would dare to say that the normal price before this chart, you could say, for consumer electronics is like 12,000, maybe even 12,500 disk. So to see a struggle to stay above 10,000 disk is not good from that perspective. 10,500 for the first seller, 11K for most. And again, it's a little bit of a lack of demand, 9,600 for the buyers. That is continuing to play with these prices and put pressure on these prices. The biggest victim over, actually, I would say, spring and summer have been the PI materials tied to fuels, like the coolants. Normal price at least above 10,000 disk, and actually we've been able to do 11 and 12,500 for quite a little bit before spring and summer here, but now we are definitely at very low prices and not pulling up from that anytime soon. It looks like 9,800 for the sellers, 9,000 disk for the buyers. It's not the very bottom, but we're clearly still in the very cheap territory. So my expectation on that is, if increased activity does end up with increased demand for like plex and things like that, that could be the boon for PI. Finally, a recovery in the general recovery in the PI market. Will that materialize? Very difficult to say, of course, because the market has gotten used to these lower prices, which you can see here, for instance, in the construction blocks. You can see that the variations are now starting to be around 10,000 disk. We still have a couple of differently acting goods as well, like cryoprotectant solutions, which are tied to implant production for a big part, which is the reason for this big spike right here, because we had implants for the triclavian weapon systems that were introduced by CCP. And here you get like a little bit of a pull up from 100,000 disk. I personally am keeping an eye on this one, but for real buy opportunities. 120,000 for the sellers, 110,000 for the buyers. Looking at this chart, if the buyers dip below 100,000 disk, that's where I would love to grab some cryoprotectant solutions, just to be ready for eventually a Vorton projector implant line. Enriched uranium is finally pulling up from the bottom as well, so this is tied to fuels. You can clearly see that we were doing quite okay in the first half of the year, and then we had this decline to very, very low prices. We even went to less than 9,000 disk on a couple of days. That's where, of course, you would have made the very best deals, but sellers 11,500, that is still not the average, despite the fact that this starts to look like there's not enough supply. 12,500 for enriched uranium is normal. It's not that easy to produce it. 11,000 for the buyers. At least it is showing first signs of a little bit of increased demand here, so I would call that good news. Integrity response drones able to maintain its gains quite a little bit better. 2 million is for the sellers and 1.94 million almost for the buyers. Very narrow margin. So a bit of a different story from the broadcast notes here. Looks like for the integrity response drones, the market is saying increased demand may just be the ticket. Mechanical parts back below 10,000 disk and quite sharply right here. Less than 10,000 for the sellers, 9,200 for the buyers. Yeah, tied to fuels, definitely very, very difficult for these items. And then it must also be said, 10,500 disk is probably what I would consider a normal range for mechanical parts, because this is a lot easier to produce than, let's say, enriched uranium. Nanites is another one that's tied to the implants. Unfortunately, I would need to see buyers below 5,000 disk for that move. That's not happening anytime soon. 6,500 for the sellers, 6,000 disk for the buyers, still rather expensive. Nano factories. All right, also, you know, a bit of hesitation. Daily prices at 1 million, daily average prices well below 1 million, 840,000 disk. That is clearly showing these two sides of the gamble that you're taking in advanced PI material at the moment. Sellers are at 1 million disk, buyers are at 850,000 disk. And if you believe that there is going to be increased demand, more destruction does more construction, then of course you're on this side. And if you think that no, players are just going to be far more careful before putting up a structure, that's where these buyers are able to lower the price quite a little bit. Organic mortar applicators, all right, different story from the previous one. Able to maintain its gains, got back to a million ISK, a million for the sellers, 920,000 for the buyers. Definitely forced up here by this massive move, but will it be able to hold on to these? We don't know basically. We know that CCP will be introducing these cores very soon. They won't really be an obligation just yet, and then later down the line, up to next year, all structures will have to have these cores, will then become more vulnerable. So when will we see the impact in destruction? When will we see the impact on hesitation to put up a new structure? That could happen on the day of the patch already. That's, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how these advanced PI materials evolve as CCP comes out with you know, the introduction of the new cores, making it needed for the new anchorings, and then making it needed for everything that's up and running. Recursive computing systems doing really well to stay at around 1.5 million, 1.6 in fact for the sellers and 1.4 for the buyers. Really nice back on its average price. Is actually one of those goods that did not lose out too much. Just in June, July, it did see some bottom prices. Then we get robotics, tied to fuels, really not doing well, actually getting back to 80k, 80,000 for the buyers, 84,000 for the sellers. Average prices 80,000, so there's still just a lot more supply that's being dumped even to these buyers. Self-harmonizing power cores, trying to hold on to those gains, but not really able to do that, getting well below 2 million at this point, 1.93 for the sellers, 1.8 million for the buyers. Yeah, and sterile conduits spiked up to 1.3 million. That was a very nice increase, right? The cores, people were going a little bit nuts all of a sudden for advanced PI materials, but the you know, the sobering moment of, well, that could actually mean less demand as well in general is starting to show up here as well. Going back below 1.2 million, 1.3 for the sellers still, but a million for the buyers. It's those buyers that are obviously starting to hesitate here. Do we really want to push buy prices to 1.1, 1.2 million? Probably not yet. Yukomi superconductors are, you know, tied to those implants again as well, and well away from 50,000, so way too early to make a move on that one. And then finally the wetware mainframes that you know, have really been struggling to get back into shape. Above 2 million should be a normal price here. We do have a volume spike as well on the introduction of the cores, but the price response next to nothing. 1.8 million for the sellers, 1.7 million for the buyers. Actually one of the narrowest margins that we're seeing here on one of the cheapest advanced PI materials as well. Let's move on to the advanced moon materials, coming in at 36.50. Let's take a look at these. We will start with crystalline carbonite 114 for the Galente, and able to get back above 150 and staying there for the last week or so. 157 for the sellers, 121 for the buyers. Very noticeable as well. Not that much supply of crystalline carbonite. Now, it's actually been quite a little bit since I made that video from the Amar market, but this could be one of the impacts, of course, where supplies are diminishing because there's not that easy a supply route to Jita. It's easier to go to Amar, and that's where the dumping may be happening. I will perhaps at some point try to find a solution to cover more trade hubs, but we'll need to see how they evolve first, of course. For the photonic metamaterials, no, we were actually going to go first all the carbonites or carbide like items. So I'm looking for 2.1, which is titanium carbide for Caldari production. That one is actually also declining in price, and I do remember that in the market that was also very cheap. It's landing at around 150. It's still actually it's already going back up. 161 for the sellers, 158 for the buyers. It's already pulling back up from this decline. So this one has a seesaw movement in the 150 to the 170 range, you could say, and at the moment it's back on the upswing for that one. A little bit below average for the year, but still a respectable price. Then our 3.1 is ferrite carbide for the Minmatar, with that very pronounced spike due to the war, of course. And now we're finally crawling back from the, you could say, supply over response that put us back at a 1 year low point below 125. Almost 140 for the sellers, 133 for the buyers. I'm again not seeing that many sell orders. That is starting to be noticeable. Let's take a look at tungsten carbide on 4.1, up in price a little bit, 175. That's actually kind of a normal range. And a decently high range compared to everything else. 180 for the sellers and 168 for the buyers, and a decent amount of supply still in tungsten carbide. So this is kind of weird. You would expect that perhaps the materials needed for Amar ships would start to become rare in JITA and vice versa, but that does not seem to be the case. Amar is actually at a decently high price, but definitely below average, and Caldari in general seems to be quite plentiful, when so far here Galente is the one that has made a big resurgence, you could say, perhaps due to the fall of Nyarja. Let's take a look at the metamaterials then. We're looking for 2.1 or no 2. Let's see, 1.2. Yeah, there we go. Man, I still have to get back into this one because they were definitely in a different order before, but I'm trying to do the same thing. So Galente first, 1.2 here. Oh, that is crazy. Don't have a good explanation. Very pronounced 1 year low point here. Let's take a look at supply and demand. 11,750 for the sellers, 10,680 for the buyers. Very clearly super cheap. And look at the difference in these two goods. The carbide up, not a 1 year high point, but definitely back above average. And then it's metamaterial for the Galente Tech 2 ship production crashing down to a 1 year low point. I don't have a good explanation for this, completely unexpected for me personally. Then we have the non-linear metamaterials for Caldari ships that are also staying at a pretty low price point at the moment. 20,000 for the sellers, 19,000 for the buyers. Is very cheap for non-linear metamaterials. You can clearly see that on the chart here as well. Then we have our plasmonic for Minmatar ships also continuing their decline towards a 1 year low point, probably at a 1 year low point, well below 20k. 17,000 for the sellers, less than 15,000 for the buyers. That seems to be a sharp decline in demand all of a sudden. Let's see if the Amar one confirms that. Terahertz metamaterials, 1 year low point as well. This is potentially a massive opportunity, of course, because you already see that resurgence in crystalline carbonite. You see that where are they? Minmatar, there we go. Ferrite carbide is also starting to pull back up, and at the same time all of these metamaterials are playing with 1 year low points. But has the fall of Nyarja of course moved too much industry away from JITA that this will become the new normal? Will we see increased prices for metamaterials around Amar, Rens, Heck and things like that because industry is starting to pull out of JITA? That is a possibility as well. We'll have to see. Very interesting to see this difference in behavior between the carbide-like items and the metamaterials that are all at or close to 1 year low points. Let's take a quick look at perhaps some general trends. Fermionic condensates under pressure. Are we below 80k for the sellers at this point? No, 81,000 for the sellers, but 65,000 for the buyers. Clearly, in my opinion, showing a lack of demand. Ferrogel is actually then up. Ferrite carbide, oh, that's wrong. Ferrogel, that's what I need to click. Also going down in price, very close to 1 year low point. Let's take a look at the sellers trying for 36,000 disc. That's basically giving up right here. 34,000 for the buyers. Demand-wise, that's a little bit more respectable, but that's perhaps to be expected on these low prices as well. Fullerites was struggling as well, trying to pull back, but staying well below 1,000 disc, I would say. Yeah, 926 for the sellers, 890 for the buyers. That is not that hot. Hypersynaptic fibers. Well, if you look at this full 1 year chart, and are we below 10,000? Yeah, ooh, Man, less than 10,000 for the first seller, 8,600 for the buyers. That is very low as well. Nano transistors staying at that low barrier of 5,000. In fact, sellers below 5,000, buyers at 4,600. That is worrisome as well. Phenolic composites, another 1 year low point, another confirmation that there's either way too much supply or is demand just decreasing in JITA? That is the real question, of course. And then one exception, ceramic fibers resurging back to 450. There always has to be one contrarian indicator here. 435 for the sellers, 425 for the buyers. Ceramic fibers, actually the one winner, I would say, in the entire advanced materials section, except perhaps for crystalline carbonate. But will that last? Probably not. This is very interesting. I would love to get your takes on what's happening here in the advanced materials market in JITA itself. Is this just a lower demand situation, or are we oversupplied, which we have been before? We have to be honest, this is not completely crazy either. We have been at 1 year low points and really bad spots for a lot of the advanced materials before. So yeah, that's the question, but this could be nausea as well. Let's take a look at the Tech 2 ships next. 44 to 40. Like that. Yep, Basilisk. Well, with these super low advanced material prices, I'm honestly expecting sales to become possible here. We've got Basilisk going below 200 million, buyers below 180 million ISK. And was I not trying to buy? Doesn't say it right here, but I think I was still trying to buy a Basilisk. Maybe I picked it up at this point, but this is very cheap, right below 180 for the buyers is definitely at a 1 year low point. If you want to be ready for a spike, then you can definitely try to grab a Basilisk here. The Cerberus was starting to be under pressure last week as well, and is basically bobbing around that low point here. Sellers at 211 million, they're still trying, but the buyers are starting to lower here, 191 million. Oh, a bit of competition though. 191, 190.8. There's definitely some people trying to grab Cerberi as close as possible to 190 million. And if you look at this chart, I definitely don't blame you. I will give you this one perspective though. On this far more volatile period with the high spikes, I actually also saw oversupply be so bad that I managed to buy a Cerberus for like 185 and then sell it for 250 range. That happens as well. So this is definitely not a bad time to try, but you can see that competition is pretty hard already. Then we've got the Guardian, well, you've got that market response right here, right? 1 year low point, very pronounced. Here's the volumes, but rather carefully, we're staying below 200 million. 201 million for the sellers, 183 for the buyers. I bought mine for 184, so this is still definitely in the buy option range. And then we've got the Hound that is finally doing a little bit of a turnaround, but definitely not pulling up to a new spike just yet. 24 million for the sellers, 22 million for the buyers, and I should probably look at it here. Hound, I bought mine for 22.5 million, so I feel like that's quite reasonable, and you could still jump in on what in my opinion is a good deal. Ikitursa, bit of a spike to 450, that's interesting. 440 million for the sellers, 411 for the buyers. Rather expensive Triglavian cruiser. Could be for my read on this, could be the announcement of the new Abyssal Tier 6s. Perhaps this could become an answer to the fact that you also have Edencom ships in there, because those things could end up being a real counter to drone meta. Because yeah, that's potentially a lot of damage, unavoidable damage, not just to you, but to your drones as well. Even if they don't target your drones, they're just gonna hit everything around you, and that could become a bit of a problem. So the Ikitursa, that might just be for the Abyssal Dead Space. And then the Ishtar is actually dropping out of favor in response, potentially to that as well. A bit of dumping here 4-5 days ago. That could be going back down to towards a 1 year low point, although we started the year even worse than that. 240 million for the sellers, 194 million for the buyers. You're buying Ishtars well below 200 million. potentially also definitely an opportunity, especially if you love to fly this one like me. You can grab a cheap Ishtar. Manticore is continuing its slow decline as well. Here we'll have to choose. I haven't made a move on the Manticore just yet. 25 million for the sellers, 22 million for the buyers. And what I like about this one is you can clearly see that we don't have hundreds of Manticores here anymore. So this really ought to be bottom formation. Whatever you buy as close as possible to 22 million, I think makes a lot of sense. Next up here we get the Munin, also, you know, forming its bottom at the moment. Less than 200 for the sellers, 177 for the buyers. Just like with the Ishtar, I don't think you're making a mistake by buying one of them, but be careful on the volumes. Then we have the Nemesis right here that's already spiking up, had a bottom at 20 million ISK. You can see I didn't buy any of those, so unfortunately a little bit too late for me on this one, but 25 million now for the sellers and 21 million for the buyers is not the big bucks just yet. But if this one is the canary in the coal mine, of course, we'll also take a quick look at hunt volumes. Yeah, 40. Last week I think we still had like 200 plus in a single sell order, so this is drying up as well. If you want in on those purchases, you have to make your moves right now. And the Nemesis is showing that we could get an increased price very quickly. Oneros struggling as well. Same story as every week. Be super careful with the volumes here because I would never risk more than one of them. But yeah, buyers at 150 million. I can't blame anyone for trying to have an Oneros that's at 150 million. The Panther, okay, going below 1.1 million on the 5-day moving average. I'm adding a couple of battleships with even worse volumes because I'm seeing this more as a gauge for production cost, and this is definitely showing some pressure on production cost. Sellers 1.1 billion, buyers at 950, but the average prices are starting to be below 1.1 billion, so there is some selling to those buyers, presumably industrialists saying, all right, it's actually probably still worth a profit to just dump it right now. Then we get the Purifier that also went down another little bit here towards 20 million for the average price, but we're probably bottoming out here as well. Do I have Purifier? I bought for 22 million. We're at 24 for the sellers, 20.5 million for the buyers. But yeah, 10, 18, 30, 32, the hundreds of ships are gone, so this really ought to be the turnaround week here where we could, that's always a little bit of a gamble, but where we could start to go back up here on all of these stealth bombers. And something that has changed here, keep in mind, this is buy price with taxes included, so that I can basically have a better look at the actual profit on these numbers. So this is, I bought it for less than 22 million. 22 million on average was with the tax costs included. And I think I grabbed all of it. Then we get the Scimitar. That one is still going down to yet another 1 year low point. Less than 180 for the sellers, less than 160 for the buyers. Same story. Have one for 160 million. I mean, that just doesn't make a lot of sense in my opinion. And then we get the Widow, that is in my opinion also confirming the lower price cost that is starting to show through the market. Less than 1.1 billion for the sellers, less than a billion for one buyer, and then we go down to 800 million ISK. So there is obviously that pressure here, which I don't think you can call speculation in something like the Widow being part of that decrease in price. And then we get the Zealot that is also showing that the turnaround can happen. Oh, I should put up my holdings here. I bought a Zealot for 187 million, including cost. Let's remind you guys of that again. And look at that, 227 already for the sellers, 205 for the buyers. I could already sell at a profit. And yeah, that is this wave that we're starting to see, this pattern that we're starting to see in the Tech 2 ship market. Overproduction, hundreds of ships in the making. I'm also going to mention that here. Sure, hounds are still being bought for 22 million. I bought mine for 22.5 million, so probably very close to this price. But the bad news is, because of the availability here, it's going to be a lot harder this week than last week to actually grab a hound close to 22 million, because players are just not going to be dumping to those anymore. They're going to put up those sell orders that are starting to show signs of going back up. So they're going to hold on. And yeah, when you do still have that oversupply situation, which we're not seeing in any of these ships anymore, not by too much, that is of course when it's when it's still there, that's the time to buy. Right now, you're probably too late. You'll have to be a little bit more aggressive in your price to be certain of triggering the buy order. All right, interesting. I like it. I made the move at the right time on these stealth bombers. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next week. After that, we have the Tech 3 ships coming in at 53.30. There we go. Last week, the story was that this price spike basically was absorbed super quickly, the fastest we've ever seen in the tactical destroyer market. The Confessor is basically flat below 40 million ISK, 38 for the sellers and 35 million for the buyers. We have 270 of them here 3 days ago. That is going to normally keep things pretty stable, and it's a little bit too much for the market as well. So Confessor slightly oversupplied. If those buyers drop any further, you could potentially start to look at an investment just from this oversupply, one order that could cause us to go a little bit lower than we should. Then we get the Heckgate. This is far more in line with what I would expect, landing on 40 million ISK, 40 million for the sellers, 37 million for the buyers, and here a far more reasonable supply. But one warning: 89, 89, 89. 89, 89, 89. Well, with 70, 49, how many pages is that? That's bound to be three pages in the last 24 hours. That is still quite a lot and quite a little bit too much. Okay. Weird, not what I expected either. Very interesting. Where do they come from though? 89, 40, 41, 41. Still 40. Yeah, this is hardly going down. This is super hard competition for these sell orders, driving the sell prices back down to 40 million ISK. That's more pressure than what I expected. Then we've got the Jackdaw, flat below 40 million ISK, 38.5 for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers, 89, 89. This is interesting. Almost 2 pages here as well. A little bit less than what we saw in the Heckgate, and I don't think it's 270 ships either, like with the Confessor. So the Jackdaw, I think, has the best chance of actually remaining stable here. And then we've got the Zwepel that is going back down in price, so this will not be a pretty picture. Almost a full page, 53.24. It doesn't need that much. 37 million for the sellers, 33 million already for the buyers. And unfortunately here I can't say, all right, I would grab 1 or 2 at 33 million because everything else needs more supply. No, we actually have, for the first time in quite a while again, a sign that we may be generally oversupplied in the tactical destroyer market. So I would be slowly looking for buy opportunities, but we do need this to be maintained a little bit more, or all of this to be maintained a little bit more, and then basically those buyers starting to get filled up and getting closer to like a 30 million buy price or something like that. That's where you can definitely try to grab something, but be careful in this destroyer market. I feel like this could be oversupplied all of a sudden. And let's take a look at the cruisers, which I think if we look at what happened to the Tengu in the ticker here, it's still not good news. Less than 140 million for the sellers of Legions, 124 million for the buyers. I think I can show my holdings again as well. I bought a Legion for 135 thinking it was a good deal. Now luckily I said from the beginning this is a gamble in the tactical cruiser market. On top of that, I'm actually trading for the Legion right now, so I may even just use the ship in the end. Yeah, this is a very weird market. We have bottom prices. Now we do have 70 of them here, but that's been like 3 days ago. And for the rest, availability, this is it. We're probably talking 100 Legions on the market, and we're talking buy price at 124 million, and we're playing with 1 year low points. That again just feels completely unnatural to me, ripe for manipulation. If it happens, I have my Legion at 135 ready, but I'm not going to risk even more purchases or anything like that, because I just don't understand where this is coming from. The Loki getting back to 150 million on the average price, 152 for the seller, 139 for the buyers. and a little bit better availability, but this is still a very cheap price for what is, I think, considered to be the best tactical cruiser at the moment. Then we have the Proteus that is bouncing up from a 1-year low point. So here we do have some investments happening, but the price response 137 million for the sellers, 125. That definitely feels like it's a little bit too early. And here is the supply on this increased price. We're talking maybe 8 ships or something like that in the last 24 hours. So this just is not the supply that you would expect this price range at. And then the Tengu is struggling, going back down substantially all of a sudden as well. So 137.4 million for the sellers, 127 million for the buyers. And this is, yes, on supplies from 140 down to 137.4. We're talking probably 50 ships or so. But that this is now coming in at these bottom prices is again very strange and somewhat worrying to me personally. So this remains, in my opinion, the gamble zone of the tactical ships, of the Tech 3 cruisers, because I feel like you could super easily manipulate this market, and that is something that happens as well. Whereas right now in the destroyer market, this oversupply seems to be more general, and I don't see this as being just necessarily a one-player action, or at least that can potentially be countered by the rest of the market, right? This attempt here can be countered by other players very easily, and as a result here, it feels like a lot of a safer bet to wait for this oversupply to show in those buy orders and then try to grab some destroyers at the best time. Alright, let's move on to our extra product for the week. That'll be some salvage materials. That's been quite a long time, 60, well, exactly on the 1 hour mark. Alright, let's do that. Like that, and then I'll have to look for them a little bit. I think it's here, and is it in materials? Salvage materials. We're not going to go for the ancient ones, we're going to go for just general salvaging, and we're actually going to go through this decently quickly, I feel, just to get a feeling of the vibe. Alloyed titanium bar, definitely below average, pretty low at the moment. Armor plates, same story, crawling out of a hole, but look at the start of the year, look where we're at now, losing almost 50% over this 1 year period. Artificial neural networks, not too hot at 3000, I would say. Broken drone transceivers also had a low point in August, less than 20,000. Disk is trying to get back from that, but clearly trading below average as well. Burnt logic circuit starts at 60k, ends at 40k, lost 50% of its value. Capacitor consoles, that one is actually up in price and is worth 500,000 ISKs. That's bound to be Tech 2 related, I think, for that price range. Well, as the chart microcircuit again starts at like 550, ends up at 250, lost about half the price. I did get that feeling that salvaging at the moment was not really something to do for immediate ISK. Perhaps building up a reserve does make sense, but conductive polymers starts at 10k, ends up a little bit below that, a little bit better over the whole year, but still not too hot. Thermoplastics 10,000 ISK, but also struggling a little bit. Lawrence fluids, obviously, again, starts above 200,000, ends right here. What are the sellers at? 126, also almost 50% loss. Contaminated nanites 150, and at the moment 115, lost another 50%, a little bit less than that, but I mean, the trend is pretty obvious. We are in bad places for salvage damage. Artificial neural networks, 1 year low point. We've been here for the last month or so. Starts the year at 1200 or something like that, ends the year at 400. That's a loss of like 2/3 of its price over the last year. The defective current pump, very same story again, like starts at 15k, ends at 5k. All right, that's a pretty big list here overall, but you can clearly see that the trend is late. We got some new stuff here as well, but this is not doing well. This is doing 1 year low points. We have even new stuff as well. Now, intact armor plates tied to Tech 2, and that one is struggling as well. Look at that, starts the year at 6 million, ends the year at 4 million, 50% loss in value over the year as well. There's some small exceptions, but the okay, a bit of a surprise to me. The trend is very clear, and across the board, this is not the best time to be selling your salvage materials, and yeah, the value of salvaging seems to be pretty low at the moment. Yeah, a couple of exceptions that are trying to build back, but still look at this 1 year chart. Start at 6k, ends at 4k, spends most of the summer at a 50% loss here. That is not very good. Half the price on a lot of these power circuits. Starts at 800,000, ends at 260,000 for one, 300,000. Yeah, that's just really not that great. And then you've got some exceptions that have been able to maintain their range over the year, but it is definitely rather slim pickings for those. So there you go, guys. Not too much in detail on these salvage materials. My advice on this one would basically be, it's still okay to salvage if you like enjoy it, or if it's part of your regular playstyle. The value of it at the moment is very low, so if you do, definitely keep your materials for better times. That is at least what I would be doing. And that's going to be it for this EVE talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.